Whether you realize it or not, you're in a fight. And spiritually speaking, there's no Switzerland. There's no neutral place. There's no place you can run and get away from all of that. No, you are in a fight. And the Bible uses warfare language. I'm hoping that through this series, we can kind of straighten out, because I've seen a lot of Christians misuse warfare language because they haven't even understood who their enemy is. Your enemy is not your boss. Your enemy is not somebody from the political party that's opposite yours. Your enemy is not the people in your neighborhood or other people you might think. No, we're going to deal with this directly. But we're in a fight. And so let me share with you as I kind of get into it. This is kind of a little embarrassing moment, but the very first real fight I ever got in. Okay, and I'm not going to advocate violence in any respect, but listen to me. When I was in middle school, you know how it all gets in middle school. Some dude was talking smack with me, and I wasn't always this big, strapping hunk of a man that you see right now. But in middle school, I was wrestling on our wrestling team. But this other dude just kept talking junk all the time. So finally we called each other out, and there was going to be a fight after school, after my wrestling practice. And you know, like with middle school, man, everybody's like hanging out. Nobody's going home because it's fight time. Yeah, they're all going to watch. So I come out a wrestling practice, and we go off to this little field off the side of the gym area where we come out. Okay? And so I'm taking off my coat. We're going to go into it. And nobody goes ding, 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 ding. Okay? You know, when it's on, fight's on. Okay? So all of a sudden, I start to go like this towards the guy. And the dude that was fighting just was like, pop. He like nailed me like right in the face. And all of a sudden, all of my adrenaline kicks in. I'm like processing, what just happened? I'm like, what's going down? And the dude's like, I'm not putting up any, I'm just kind of like going this way. And he's just like, sitting my pop. It's like, dude, I'm trying to grab him. Like, that's not a good fight mechanism, okay? And so the dude just kept like wailing, and I'm like trying to grab him, like, and I'm getting angry. And you know when you're angry, you do stupid stuff. And I'm getting stupider as it goes, and he's just like, come on. So yeah, I finally did. We wrestled on the ground for a few minutes, but then all of a sudden one of the administrators come out, and then you know, like middle school, it's like turning the lights on and the cockroaches hit because nobody wanted the detention, so everybody took off. But I got my butt kicked. So yeah, I have to admit that, okay? But why did I get beat so badly? Because nobody ever taught me how to fight. Nobody ever taught me how to fight. You know, my dad abused his power. I was scared to death. My dad was a frightening creature, okay? But nobody ever taught me to fight, because why? Anybody ever see the old one? I'm talking about, they rebooted it. The new one was good, but anybody ever seen the original Karate Kid with Mr. Miyagi? Daniel's son. Yeah, Daniel's son was getting it. You have an enemy who's a bully, okay? And he don't fight fair. And like Daniel's son was getting his butt whooped, and Mr. Miyagi knew karate. So Daniel was like, oh yeah, teach me how to do karate. So we went over to Mr. Miyagi's house, and Mr. Miyagi said, here's my car. Wax on, wax off. Anybody remember that? I remember during my sabbatical, I kind of binge watch, I'll tell off on myself. I binge watch Cobra Kai. It was kind of cool for me. You know, sweep the leg, no mercy, yes. But, okay, the key is we all need in our lives a Mr. Miyagi. Well, like I grew up watching the Rocky movies. Sometimes we need a Mick that comes along beside us. He's like, yeah, you're an Italian stallion. I'm going to teach you to eat. I'm going to teach you to eat lightning and crap thunder. Yeah, you're going to take on your enemy. So here's the scoop, guys. What my heart is in this is whatever it is, your coach, your trainer, or your sensei. I want to help you, because guess what? This is Fight Club. This is a personal journey for me. Because things that I learned and things that I experienced, mental health is a huge issue. It affects every area of life. Because mental health, everything we do in life is based on your thoughts. Whether you realize it or not, every thought gives birth to beliefs, which give birth to actions, but it all begins there. Our thoughts are powerful. In fact, the New Testament teaches us the way to a healthy transformation has everything to do with your mind. And that's why this is so important, because mental health, listen to me. Let me give you a few stats for a moment. Do you know that 50% of Americans will deal with a mental health crisis at some point in your life? That means either you or the person next to you, it's going to happen. Do you know that in a year, 1 out of 5 Americans deal with mental health issues? And I think that the stats could be bigger because think about this for a moment. Look at the stigma associated to mental health. I know that I felt it, but there's so much. It's embarrassment, it's a shame. I know that I dealt with it growing up. My dad struggled with issues what he would never admit. My dad was a hypochondriac, but beyond that, my dad dealt with mental health issues, which led to him committing suicide. Okay? Mental health, guess what? The third biggest cause of death in America for people under the age of 20 is suicide. Do you know the number one prescribed medication in the United States? It's medication for anxiety and depression. Okay? So we're talking about huge. In fact, one of the people I've come to love, she's been so helpful to me, Dr. Carolyn Leaf. She's a devout Christian, but she's also a neuroscientist. I've read a number of her books. In fact, I'm reading the one right now, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. But Dr. Leaf said that 90% of physical ailments are associated to mental health. Because while only 10% are the result of heredity or natural-born things. See, the oversecretion of things like cortisol into the system because of stress and other points lower our immunities. It all is connected. And when I learned about mental health, I learned that it was a whole thing, that these are the three pillars they taught me. What they called mindfulness, movement, and nutrition, or fuel. In other words, do you know your diet affects your mental health? Do you know that exercise affects your mental health? Do you know mindfulness? In other words, having a place where you calm down. But you see, the enemy has so raw a system where in our current culture, overstimulated, sedentary, fast food oriented is a recipe for mental health disaster. Some of the best things you could do for your mental health, some of you, is to turn off your TV and your cable news. Can I help you with this for a moment? You got to realize that news channels are media, they're entertainment industries that are for profit. Okay? And guess what? Fear sells. So some of you would just be good to cut off the sources of stuff you're listening to. Some of you, for your mental health's sake, could shut off the social media stuff. Because we listen to stuff and we're overly stimulated and constantly going. And what's the truth? And all of it's over. So for me, okay, at the end of 2020, I realized I was in a pretty dark place. And I had enough common sense to do something that was so uncharacteristic of me and was kind of uncomfortable because I had developed a lifestyle that, in all honesty, wasn't healthy, but it was all I knew, okay? So at the end of 2020, I realized things were not good, so I called a friend of mine who was one of my overseers. I said, can I come and talk to you? Because I have never been used to, in the past, opening up and talking about my issues. I grew up more as a survivor. So I would just push that down and keep moving. And that's the way I lived. But I said, can I talk to you? So I just opened up and started sharing a bit. He goes, hey, listen, I'll come along beside you. I walked that way. And he began to walk through to me, and he said, I had to come to the realization that not only was I unhealthy, and the way I was living unhealthy, but I had created an unhealthy environment for my staff, which broke my heart. But my staff, my overseers interviewed them. They're like, man, we're exhausted. He's always on the go. He's the first one in. He's the last one to leave. We go from one thing to the next. We're exhausted. We can't keep up. We feel guilty. I mean, it was all toxic stuff that I created. And I didn't know and understand. And those guys said to me, listen, you need to take a sabbatical. And then the next part of it was very, very private. But how many of you know trying to keep things very, very private, especially in a Christian community, can be almost impossible? You know, that's why awkwardness is, this is all going on the airwaves. So I could just imagine some of the memes that people might create. But here's the scoop. I don't really care. Because the thing that they suggested to me, they said, we suggest you go to a mental health clinic. Now, I had surrendered because do you know one of the other things mental health-wise? Do you know that addictive behaviors are all the results of humans attempting to self-medicate their pain? So whether it's porn, whether it's alcohol, drugs, overeating, over shopping, spending too much money. We do so many different destructive behaviors, all trying to medicate our pain. Because we want a dopamine hit. We want something to make us feel better in the moment. And so, going to a mental health clinic when they said, yeah, I had surrendered, but I have to be very transparent with you. I felt like the biggest loser and failure in the world. It was so palpable. It was so real. I felt like, man, you're a pastor of a church. You're a Christian. You've been walking with Jesus. All of this surrounded me. And then I said, but I said, okay, I'm going. I went. And then I get there, and they go through all of my luggage, going through everything. They say, hey, you can't keep this in your room. I'm like, oh, my God, yeah. And, for me, struggling with the stigma on that end of it, yeah, when family members attempted to communicate, hey, how are you? I sent back memes of myself. Some of you might not even know what this is. But when I was a kid, there was a movie called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I sent Jack Nicholson pictures of myself from the movie. Like, that's how I feel. But you know what? It was humiliating, but that's where God meets us. Humility brings grace. And what I desperately needed to understand was why. See, we want things to change in our lives, but often what happened, like yesterday, I went out to garden a bit, pulling some weeds in my garden, in my landscaping area. But sometimes we do this with behaviors that we want to see changed. It's like cutting it off, but not digging up the root. So guess what? You don't have to be a brain scientist to know. If you just cut off a weed without pulling up the roots, it's just going to keep growing back. And because we've not gone deep enough to ask the question, why do I feel the way I do? Why am I driven the way I am? Why do I do this beyond not like this is wrong and I feel bad and I feel pain. No. Why do I do it? What's behind it? If you don't seek that, you won't be able to get over the situation. You'll just keep repeating it again and again, which we've done. And what I learned in the mental health clinic, I had to learn there was more than forgiveness. See, I was raised in a violent, dysfunctional household in a time and an era when nobody had talked about it. I learned to hide because you never knew what was going to set my father off. And I'm alive today by the grace of God because when my father would lose it, he didn't know when to stop. And he was a very large and intimidating man. But beyond that, so I learned this methodology, what I call survivor mentality. Just do what you got to do. Stay low, keep it, and keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. But you see, I had to recognize, I had forgiven, and he wasn't the only. There was a whole narrative the enemy tried to create about my life. I'll share more as we go, but listen. What I had done was be used to sometimes suppressing my feelings, not dealing with that, just moving on, whatever you got to do to get by. And too much self-talk and trying to handle it by myself because the question was who really did care. And so in essence, I had to unfold because one of the things I had to learn was there was more than forgiveness. Had I forgiven all the people who had been mean and treated me horribly in my life? Yes. But I didn't realize I had to cancel the toxic lies that had been instilled in me from things that had been said to me by living human beings. And that's where I began the journey, is I had to start to begin to discover those things. And then I learned this in mental health. I learned that there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am wrong. And I realized that I had lived most of my life in shame, thinking that there was something wrong with me. And so I had to begin because those behaviors, things that you believe down here, why was I always busy? Why did I go to situations and hide? Nobody would know I was hiding, but I was. One of the most embarrassing calls I had to make, my pastor, who was here a couple weeks ago, I called him, I said, Pastor Chris, this is a scoop, I need to deal with this, but I want to apologize to you. Because most of the times when I've been coming to Alabama, I'm in the room, but I'm hiding. Because I'm struggling with, why am I here? Why am I? I'm with some other leaders that have amazing things going on, and I'm like, feeling like CRAP. And I'm not telling anybody that. But here's the scoop. I said to him, and Pastor Chris said to me, Ken, you're not here because of the size of your church. You're here because I love you. He has no idea how much that meant. But he goes, yeah, go deal with that stuff. I encourage you. But just don't let them medicate you. You don't need medication. You need to deal with that stuff from the past. So I went and I began to learn that it was because why? That's what I want to help you to discover today. That your enemy operates. His primary means is thoughts. That the battlefield is your mind. That's where the warfare comes. Satan's tools are lies and deception. And he's been at it for a very long time, and he's very good at his job. We need to understand how this all happens because we haven't understood our enemy. We haven't understood how all of this works and how. See, God gave us a tool. Your brain is an amazing tool. But so much of the things we do unconsciously. Like, I guarantee you, you're probably not even conscious when you drive home today because you've done it so many times. You just do it automatically. In fact, you got up, and when you brushed your teeth this morning, you probably didn't think much about it because you've been doing it 1,000 times, right? And hopefully you all did that. Hopefully the person next to you, like, yeah, I hope you did that, yeah. But, right, there are so many things we do. They're automatic, right? They just boom, boom, boom. They just go off, right? And here's the thing. So many times we don't realize we kick in. Our brain automatically takes over because we do things the way we've always done them. In fact, when we feel bad, we go back to stuff that was of the part of our past, and we just go back to it because our brain, we've trained to go to certain places. But here's the good news. You can retrain and rewire your brain. Thank God for people like Dr. Carolyn Leaf. What the new changes. See, some of what I'm going to deal with during this series, I'm predominantly going to deal with it from a spiritual point of view, but I'm going to introduce some aspects of science and some aspects of medicine on fronts. But listen to me. Science has now proven what they call neuroplasticity, which means this. You can retrain your brain. It's not simple. It's not, you have to work at it, okay? But you can retrain your brain. And here's one of the things that came to me at the mental health clinic was so life-giving. You know the scripture says God's mercies are new every morning? Do you know that every morning you have new neural brain cells that are created, which give you the opportunity to retrain your brain to now think in line with the thoughts of God? The way that God intended for us to think. But that's what we have to get to because the way our enemy operates, he attacks that. So here's today's introduction message to this series. And the title of today's message is Sizing Up Your Enemy. See, if anybody's going to go, one of the reasons I called this Fight Club, my therapist that I had at the mental health clinic was a former professional boxer. So one of the things we did when we used to go in and do some physical training as part of our therapy aspects. That's why when you saw that commercial last week I did, that's my basement. I have a heavy bag, I have a light bag. There's some ways that I just deal with stuff, okay? But physical exercise is a good way to deal with it. But listen, what you and I need to know, because when you're going to fight an enemy, in professional boxing, they watch tape. They watch stuff of their enemy. They know who they're going into, what tendencies they have, and how they fight. Well, today we're going to look at who your real enemy is, because listen, this is the main thought today. The battles we fight are won or lost in our minds. The battles we fight are won or lost in our minds. You see, Satan is our enemy. He is real. Do you know, this is crazy, but think about this for a moment. 75%, according to George Barna, who's the #1 statistician for Christians, for the Christian community at large, 75% of people who identify as born-again Christians, followers of Jesus, do not believe the devil is a real entity, but just a symbol for evil. And it's like the movie, The Usual Suspects, Kaiser Sose, played by Kevin Spacey. He says this line in the movie that the biggest trick the devil ever pulled is to convince the world he doesn't exist. And there's many people in our intellectual society today that think all of that's poo-poo, all of that's ancient, antiquated. If you think that way, then you really have mental illness. But no, the enemy is real. And we need to know that the way he fights, that the battle is for your mind, that he uses deception and lies that play to disordered desires. What are disordered desires? See, we live in a broken world. This is what the Bible would call your flesh. In other words, there are things that we want, there's things that we have desires for, but not all of our desires are good. But he plays to ideas. See, he gives you a thought, an idea, that the person that you're with, no, they're not really meeting your needs. You need to get rid of that one and get a better one because they'll really meet your needs. See, the enemy works through deceptive ideas that play to disordered desires that are sometimes celebrated in a world system that holds to those things. And that's why you have to understand how this, because the number one tool of the devil is to convince you that things that are actually lies are true. And you see, when you believe something is true that is a lie, that's what the Bible calls a stronghold. And what is a stronghold? That's a fortress. That's a place that's a military thing that people hold to that ground. And that's the problem. See, there are things that we believe in life that are actually lies. And some of them are not dangerous. I mean, how many of you all were raised with this idea that if you're going to go swimming, you can't swim, and if you've eaten, you can't swim for 30 minutes after you've eaten? Anybody believe that? Anybody be told that? You ever teach your kids that? And well, guess what? That's a lie. It's not true at all. It's not. But we've grown up. I grew up that way. Oh, man, we were all looking at our watch going, So yeah, some things lies that you believe, maybe you lose out on some swimming time, okay? Here's another one. Ever believe this idea that somehow we only use 10% of our brain? I grew up believing that. I'm like, yeah, wow, okay? A lot of Christians believe that. That's not true. It's a lie. Maybe we at one time, but we have access to all the parts of our brain. These are just things that become lies. But those are things that are not dangerous. But what happens if the lies are things like, I'm not good enough. God doesn't really care about me. I've messed up too much in life. I'll never change. There's no hope for me. I'm a bad person. See, those lies impact the way we live. They may keep you from applying to a certain school, applying to a certain job, doing certain things with your life because you believe something that's not true. But for you, it is total truth. It's something you believe. And that's how the enemy works, because you know the problem with deception? It's deceiving. Which means this, it's not a play on words. Listen to me. If you knew you were deceived, you wouldn't be. That's how deceptive it is. And Satan has been at his job for a very long time. We as a Christian community need to understand that. Paul was the ultimate thought warrior. Look what he wrote in 2 Corinthians 2:11. He said, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. The word schemes in the Greek is the word noeme. It means this, it's a perception or a thought. Satan's tactics, his strategies are mind games. That's how he operates. That's how he works. In fact, when I was studying some of this, when I was studying about boxing, do you know this? That boxing is 90% mental and 10% physical? Yeah. I grew up as a kid. What I consider the greatest boxer I ever watched was a man named Muhammad Ali. And when he was going to fight a guy named George Foreman, nobody thought, George Foreman had a punch that could knock out a rhino, okay? The dude could punch. He had a punch stronger than Drago, okay? But he also had a long reach. So the question was, how is Muhammad Ali ever going to beat somebody like this? That's like that's an unmovable force. That's such intimidating point. But Ali did something that it came to be called the rope-a-dope. He pulled Foreman into his thing. He wore the dude out, but just going in and kind of letting him pound on him, but he was protecting himself. Okay? Wore out Foreman until Muhammad Ali knocked out George Foreman. Before there was a George the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. No, yes. But guess what? Boxing is 90% mental, which is why it's important that you and I recognize. See, the weapons, again, that the enemy uses are lies and deception. And so we have to begin to operate the way that warfare happens is to acknowledge the things that are lies that you believed were true. And that's why it's so hard, because we will fight and defend things we believe are true. And there's things about yourself, because let me give you this example for a minute. Why is it somebody can compliment you and you'd forget about that pretty much somewhere? But somebody says something bad, somebody says something hurtful to you, that may live with you forever? See, the enemy exploits things. Here's what studies have proven. That our minds are more prone to believe negative things are true. Which is why he exploits you with media and all the rest of the fronts. Because fear sells. It makes money. And we buy into it. Some of you, that's why I said, shut off your social media feeds and news channels, because it scared the bejeebies out of too many of you. Come on. It's time we find some aspects of where we can begin to walk this journey, because listen to me. This is how the warfare goes. Listen to this. Ephesians 6:10 says this. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Pastor David did an amazing job last week. What did he tell you last week? Check your source, check your gear, check your stand, right? We're going to go a little deeper today, because guess what? Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. You need to know where your fight really resides. He said, put on the full armor of God that you may take your stand against the devil's schemes. See, can I tell you one of the ways that I'm brokenhearted, because Christians have been fooled in this aspect? Can I tell you one of the ways we've been deceived as a Christian community sometimes? The church's responsibility is not to save America. The church's responsibility is to save Americans. And that little twist and distortion of the enemy has meant why we are not effective reaching half of our population in the nation, no matter what side of the political aisle you find yourself on. Because you think the other side's your enemy. But guess what? If you're a follower of Jesus, last time I read it, you're supposed to love your enemies. We need to regain our mental sanity on a lot of fronts. But listen to me. He said what? Here's your enemy. Put on the full armor of God that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against what? Flesh and blood. In other words, your mate's not your struggle. Your boss is not your struggle. Your neighbors are not your struggle. The other political party is not your struggle. The enemy is not what you think it is. He says what? But the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. See, his tactics of lies and deception, the only thing capable of seeing through that, the Bible says God's word is sharper than any two-edged sword. And one of the misuses, God's word was never intended for Christians to use on one another. That's one of the ways we need to gain our minds back, okay? But it's not meant to beat up your brother and sister. No, your enemy is that unseen force that plants. Because what is truth? Truth is reality. What's a lie? Unreality. Ideas are assumptions about reality. And not every idea is true. And we buy into a whole host of crazy, stupid stuff sometimes that we believe is true. That's why I say, come on, stop watching your social media feed. They just want your money half the time. We need to gain our sanity, because where is truth? That's why you and I need to know God's word is sharper than any two-edged sword. It pierces to dividing asunder thoughts and of the soul and spirit, of the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Jeremiah told us that your heart can be deceptive. That's the problem today. I just want it. I feel like that. So what do we think? What's truth? How I feel? What I identify as? What a culture says, what opinions are, what media feed you follow says. What's true? That's what we have to begin to. Only God's word can cut through that stuff and help us to gain an understanding, because the warfare, my friends, is in your mind. But too easy, we're distracted. We take up the warfare with what's going on in everybody else's life and fail to realize that we're not fighting against anybody else. We need to gain the mastery of our own mental health, because it affects every facet of life. Your mental health affects your physical health. Your mental health affects your spiritual health. Your mental health affects it all. Remember I asked you at the beginning of the year, will you be made whole? This is key to understanding that end. So in essence, that's how the enemy operates. He works through lies and deceptions. Look at this. 2 Corinthians 10 says this, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. I wish the Christian community understood this. In other words, we don't change culture by protests, boycotts, and all the rest of the things. That's how the world wages war. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God and take captive every what? Take captive every what? That's where the warfare is. It's in your thoughts to make it obedient to Christ. A stronghold. Okirama is the Greek word. It's a military place like a fortress, a castle, or a military stronghold. A stronghold biblically is a lie that you believe is true. And therefore the enemy controls you through it. The enemy operates. There's so many things. See, in the Christian community, there's either two camps of people in the Christian community. The overwhelming majority is what I call they're in the matrix. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? People are just going through the motions, living a life, not realizing who's really in control. And that's the way Satan loves to operate the most. Stealth, behind the scenes. You're just going about your daily life, unconscious of the thing, okay, of what's going down. Or there is a segment of the Christian community that do believe in the devil, but they've got what I call the Wizard of Oz syndrome. In other words, they look at the devil like the great, big, bad Oz. Oh, they've never looked behind the curtain and see the one that's pulling the strings. No, but there's a lot of weirdness in the Christian community about the devil that, some of the people who believe in it, it gets weird. It gets strange. And then everything is the devil. I'm like, no, maybe you could just get a little bit more sleep. No, we blame the devil about everything. And maybe he's that active in your life, but seriously. We need a little bit more to understand where the warfare is because we need to get control of our thoughts. And that's the good news, friends. We can rewire and control our minds because why? Our enemy's primary strategy against us is lies, and he is a master of deception, which is why you need to know how he operates. Here's Jesus 4:11 on the devil. John 8:44 says, you belong. He was talking to religious leaders of his time. Jesus said to them, you belong to your father, the devil. So here's the biggest reason why I believe the devil's real. Jesus did. Jesus said, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. You know what? That's good news, because if the devil's talking to you, one thing you can be sure of, it's a lie. Jesus said there's no truth in him. So if he tells you you're not good enough, guess what? That's a lie. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar. And this is the only time the Bible ever credits the devil for being creative, a creator of something. He said he's the father or the progenitor of lies. So the devil is a liar. He's good at it. We need to know it. It's searching those things because the fight means recognizing how he fights. We have to discover what lies we have believed as true and replace them with truth. Because listen, as I close today, listen, only when we become apprentices of Jesus can we learn the truth that frees our souls. See, Jesus is the great shepherd, my friends. He comes to cause us to lie down in green pastures. We're on the move all the time. That's something I needed to learn and understand. He leads us beside the still waters. He restores our soul. He leads us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we don't have anything to fear because he's with us. See, when we believe it, but Jesus said to the Jews, I love this, in John 8:31, same text he was talking about the devil. He said this, to the Jews who believed in him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings. Now what's critical here, the word hold to is a little word in Greek, meno, M-E-N-O. It means literally to abide, to continue, to dwell in. Jesus used the word when he said, I am the true vine and you are the branch, if you abide, meno, in me. He used the word when he said, if you hear my teachings and don't do them, you build your house on the sand. But when you do, when you hold to them, when you obey what I tell you, you build your house on a rock. Meno. The idea is this. Holding to the teachings of Jesus is not a set it and forget it. Just coming in and hear something on Sunday, then go away and forgetting it all is not how you gain victory. There has to be a point in which you embrace it. There has to be a point where you say, come on in, live with me. Speak to me. Allow it to become real to me. That you begin to center your life around the teachings of Jesus. To be a disciple, I like the word apprentice, because you are learning directly from him. To live like him. To live like he lived. To understand life from his point of view. To no longer argue, that you lay aside your own views and adopt his views. That's what it means. And Jesus said, if you hold, that's a conditional word. If you hold to my teachings. Why? Because it may mean having to go swim upstream in a culture that doesn't live that way. It may even be in the church world where people don't live that way. But it's living as Jesus said, not what's publicly accepted at points, or not even what may be a majority view. But it's what Jesus said should guide us and direct us. He said, if you hold to my teachings, then will you be my disciples, or my apprentices indeed. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's how we come under the yoke of Jesus. That's how we begin to realize that the value system that you create, who you see yourself in, needs to be established by what Jesus said. Not what your mom and dad said, not what your boyfriend, girlfriend said, not what your ex-spouse said, not what you name it. It's not any of those sources. It's what did God say? Can I embrace that? Our feelings, we have to be honest with. We'll fight against that sometimes. Our feelings are what foster our actions, which is why it takes time to win the war for your mind. But when you begin to live in that way, Jesus said, you'll know the truth. And the truth will make you free. And that's the good news I want to leave you with, guys. Listen to me. This is the last thought. The life we live is the result of the thoughts we think. The life we live. And the good news is this. You can retrain your brain. You can rework. You can rethink the way you... Is it easy? No. Sometimes it's a real battle. The battle is with yourself. Believing the truth. Because you look in the mirror and see something different than God sees. And you have to blow past all of the feelings, emotions, voices, and toxic thoughts that have been a part of what's been driving you. Why was I always busy? You don't want to know why I was always busy? Because if I wasn't busy, I wasn't worth anything. But that was a lie. I'll be honest with you about things as we go into it, but here's my encouragement to you. I would ask you to come along over the next 5 weeks and walk this out. Because this is Fight Club. I want to teach you how to fight. I want to teach you how to defeat your enemy and to walk in the freedom that Christ has already paid for you. Amen?